In part 2 of quadratics, we'll take a look at solving quadratics. So the first day, we'll start here on page 2. It says factor and find the x-intercepts of y equals x squared plus 2x minus 24. So this, since the a value is 1, we know we can use a diamond problem. So in our diamond right here, we'll put the last number on top, negative 24. We'll put the 2 on the bottom, and we want to know what multiplies to negative 24 that adds to 2. And that would give us 4 and 6, and the 4 would have to be negative. So when we write it in factored form, it's x minus 4, x plus 6. Now when we solve it, we want to know what makes it equal 0. So x minus 4, what makes that equal 0? X plus 6, what makes that equal 0? And if we solve, our two answers will be positive 4 and negative 6. So we've just found the x-intercepts of the graph, which means when we graph this quadratic at negative 6 and at positive 4, it will be a smiley face graph because the a value is 1. And here's what it will look like. So when you're factoring and solving, you're finding the x-intercepts. So it says right here, solving a quadratic is another way of asking you to find the x-intercepts. They're also called the roots or zeros of the graph. They're called the zeros because it's where the y value equals 0, and we'll take a look and see why they're called the roots today. So A, it says, what are the x-intercepts of the quadratic in the warm-up? And we already found them. They're at 4, 0 and negative 6, 0. And it says sketch the quadratic. Oh, I guess I didn't have to sketch it there. We could have done it here. So negative 6 and 4. We don't know the vertex, so we'll just sketch it. We know it's a smiley face graph. Okay, solve the following quadratics. Okay, so again, we're solving. So we'll do a diamond problem, 90, 19. What multiplies to 90? That adds to 19. That would be 9 and 10. Factored form is x plus 9, x plus 10. But solving it, it will be negative 9 and negative 10 because it's what makes those 0. So that's the solving part. Let's do the next one. What multiplies to negative 9? That adds to 0. And that would be 3 and negative 3. So factored form is x plus 3, x minus 3. But if I ask you to solve it, then we're looking at x equals negative 3 and x equals 3. And then our last one right here, what multiplies to 3? That adds to 5. And the only thing that multiplies to 3 are 1 and 3 and negative 1 and negative 3, and none of those add to 5. So right now, we need to find another way of finding these x-intercepts if we can't use a diamond problem. And so we'll take a look at that today. Not all x-intercepts can be found easily using a diamond problem or box and circle because not all x-intercepts are integers. What that means is not all these answers are going to be these whole number answers. So we can use this thing called quadratic formula to find the x-intercepts of a graph when we can't factor. And here are the steps for solving it. There is a way to remember this formula. It's a song that goes to Pop Goes the Weasel. So I'm going to play that song for you, maybe twice here. Here's the first song. So if you think
we're recording.
Think of Pop Goes the Weasel, and instead of opposite or negative b, we'll do opposite b, because if b is negative, it would make it positive. Here's another version.
X equals negative b. X equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac over 2.
So if you can kind of have that tune in your head, it will help you remember the quadratic formula. And we'll practice it so much, you'll probably have it memorized anyways. Okay, so how do we use this? We'll do it for this one problem that we couldn't factor and find and solve. So the first step is make sure there's 0 on one side. So if you notice, we have 0 on one side, everything else is on one side. So we're going to identify a, b, and c. So a is the number next to the x squared. If you don't see a number next to the x squared, it's a 1. B is the number next to the x, and here the b value is 5. And the c value is the number by itself, which would be 3. So again, you get 0 on one side, everything else is on the other. You find A, B, and C. And then we plug into the formula. So plugging into the formula, we have x equals opposite b right here, and the opposite of 5 is negative 5. So negative 5 plus or minus the square root of b squared, so we have 5 squared, minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is 3, all over 2a. Okay, it looks like a lot, but then we're going to simplify it. So there's these 3 numbers that I'm going to want you to get. So the number under the radical, the square root sign, the first number, and the number on the bottom. So when we simplify, it will look like this. X equals negative 5 plus or minus the square root. 5 squared is 25, and 4 times 1 times 3 is 12. So 25 minus 12 is 13. So we have the square root of 13. And that's all over, and radical down, big, all over 2 times 1, which is 2. And this is now when we can type it into the calculator and get 2 answers. So the first one we'll do negative 5 plus the square root of 13. Maybe I'll pop that up here and show you. So we'll do negative 5 plus the square root of 13. We'll hit enter and then divide by 2. And the other one we'll do negative 5 minus the square root of 13, hit enter, divide by 2. And the reason why we're looking at 2 answers is, remember what we're solving for, the roots of the graph, and there can be 2 places where your smiley face or frowny face graph crosses the x-intercept. All right, so let's try typing this in once my calculator loads here. Okay. All right, so I'll just open a Scratchpad page. And again, it was negative 5 plus the square root of 13. I like to hit enter before I divide, so I'll hit enter and then divide by 2. All right, so there's one answer. It's about negative 0.697. I'll write that down. X is about negative 0.697. I need to rewrite that. And then we'll type in the other one, which would be negative 5 minus the square root of 13. Hit enter, and then divide that by 2. And so our other answer will be about negative 4.3. Okay, so let me pop up my iPad again so you can see. So again, we did the plus, we did the minus, we got 2 answers. And if we were to sketch this graph, what it would mean is that at negative 4.3, there would be an x-intercept. At negative 0.6, so negative 0.7 about. And this would be a smiley face graph because it's a 1x squared. So your graph would look something like this if we were to graph it. So quadratic formula, notice it would have been really hard to factor those 2 numbers. So quadratic formula does that for us, and it solves actually and gets us the answers. So we're just going to try a few more examples. Again, here's the YouTube videos if you want to see them again. We're going to try the next 2. All right, so the first, I'll make this bigger here. First up is get everything on one side. So I'm just going to, since the 3x squared is on this side, I'll just move everything to the left-hand side. So the first thing I'll do is I'll add 7 to each side and subtract 2x. So the x's we combine. Okay, so here's what it looks like. We'll get 3x squared plus 10x minus 7 equals 0. So there's the first step, get everything on one side. The next step is to find a, b, and c. A is the number next to the x. B is the number next to, A is the number next to the x squared, B is the number next to the x, and C is the number by itself. Here it's negative. Then we'll plug into quadratic formula. X equals opposite B plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2a. So there's the next step that I want. Then after that, I'll want you to simplify this number, and this number. So x equals negative 10 plus or minus the square root. In my calculator, I can just type in 10 squared minus 4 times 3 times 7. And we'll get 16. And that's all over 6. And then I just break it up. And in our calculator, we'll do the plus. So negative 10 plus, the square root of 16 is 4, divided by 6. And negative 10 minus the square root of 16, which is 4, divided by 6. And then we'll get our 2 answers. So the first answer will be negative 1. If we type that in. And the second answer will be negative 14 over 6, which reduces to negative 2/3. Okay, so here are two answers. I guess I shouldn't put boxes around them yet. So x will be 1 and x equals negative 2.3 repeating. And that's what quadratic formula. So again, what we solve for here is at negative 1 it crosses, and negative 2.3 it crosses. It's a smiley face graph, skinnier than the original graph because of that 3a value. And there's a sketch of our quadratic. Okay, let's try 3 more, and then you have the rest of the hour to work. Again, we have to get everything on one side. Since the bigger x squared is on the left, I'll just move the other one over. So we'll get x squared plus 5x plus 6 equals 0. This one, we'll find a, b, and c as the next step. So a is 1 here for this, because it's a 1x squared. B is a 5, c is a 6. We'll plug into quadratic formula. X equals opposite b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2a. And then we'll get these 3 numbers here. So x equals negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 25 minus 24. What is that, 1? All over 2. Break it up into the plus and the minus. Negative 5 plus the square root of 1 is just negative 4. Negative 4 divided by 2 is negative 2. And then negative 5 minus 1, which is the square root of 1, is negative 6. Negative 6 divided by 2 is negative 3. Okay, so this graph crosses at negative 2 and negative 3. If we were to draw out the parabola, it is something like that. Okay, smiley face graph because the a value is 1. Okay, let's try a few more. This one gives you a, b, and c. We don't have to solve anything because 0 is on one side. A is 1, b is 2, c is 1. Plug into quadratic formula. X equals opposite b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Should change colors there. All right, so negative 2 plus or minus 2 squared is 4. 4 minus 4 is 0. Okay, so this one, plus or minus 0, is going to get us the same thing. So this one only has one answer, negative 1. If we were to graph it at negative 1, it just crosses once. So sometimes you will just get one answer because your parabola can cross the x-axis at one spot. All right, and our last one, again, we have to get 0 on one side, so minus 2x squared. We'll add 2 to each side. We'll get x squared minus 2x plus 2 equals 0. Okay, let's double check. Okay, so here, a is 1, b is negative 2, and c is 2. So let's plug into quadratic formula. So x equals opposite b. The opposite of negative 2 is 2, plus or minus the square root. Now we'll have to put the negative 2 in parentheses because when we square it, that tells our calculator to square the negative 2. Minus 4 times a times c. I'll try to squeeze that 2 in there. All over 2a. Okay, we'll solve. X equals 2 plus or minus the square root. You can just type this in. This is 4 minus 4. So here we get a negative. So this will be 4 minus 8, which is negative 4 over 2. And if you try typing in a negative radical into your calculator, it won't work because there's no number square that equals negative 4. So this will be no real solution. So if you have a negative number under your square root sign, there's no solution because, for example, if we take the square root of 9, it equals 3 because 3 squared equals 9 and negative 3 squared equals 9. If you have the square root of negative 4, there's no number times itself that's negative. So when we get a negative, we'll say no real solution. All right, your assignment then is just to practice 5 problems. Practice. So get everything on one side. What's A, what's B, what's C. Plug in a quadratic formula. You can get the decimal answers. And that is on Delta Math. You can use the rest of this page as scratch paper, or you can grab another sheet in class.